And we're on the air. Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, good evening, wherever in the world you find yourself today. Welcome to Code Mentor Office Hours. My name is Mark. We're really excited about today's session. Today is officially the beginning of our JavaScript framework series that Code Mentor is running. The next couple months, pretty much all the office hours, which there's multiple ones a week, are around JavaScript as a theme. And kicking off today is our special guest, Geoff Goodman. And just a very brief introduction to Geoff, and then we'll kick it over to him to screen share. Geoff is a self-taught developer, and he created Plunker, and it all in his spare time while maintaining a career in finance. Really amazing feat right there. And he's here today to discuss utilizing AngularJS alongside Plunker. We're really excited to have him. So everybody, very quietly and muted, welcome Geoff Goodman. And Geoff, I'll kick it over to you, and Geoff's going to give us a presentation. Following that, we'll do Q&A, so feel free to throw in any ideas or questions you want to talk about in the chat, and I'll be sort of moderating that, and when Geoff wraps up, we'll go through those. So take it away, Geoff.
All right, well, thanks. So yeah, as Mark said, I'm Geoff, and I'm actually just coming back from NGConf last night. So I gave a talk there last Friday. Highly recommend checking it out. It's called Badges. We don't need no stinking badges. I did that with an important figure in the Angular community, Lucas Rubelke. And so this is going to be a very different talk from that, whereas that one was non-technical. This is going to be a little bit of technical stuff. So I'm not sure what level of Angular everyone is. So what I've done is I've kept it at a pretty superficial level in terms of the Angular, but please feel welcome to ask me any more technical questions during the questions period. So the idea of this talk is how I went about implementing drag and drop in the new version of Plunker. And as you'll see, that there's a number of different use cases for drag and drop, and so I decided to create my own system, and I'll talk about what alternatives there are out there and why I wasn't able to use them, and a little bit of the design and implementation decisions I made in creating this. So, let's try. So who am I? Well, I've already got an introduction, so I'll just skip right ahead here. So I'm Geoff Goodman. If you want to reach out to me on Twitter, I suggest @filearts, and on GitHub you could check out this code. It's in a repository called Angular-drag-drop in my GitHub account. So as Mark said, I'm a professional business evaluator. At night I code. I create Plunker. So if you're not familiar with that website, I highly recommend checking it out. It's a little bit like Jazz Fiddle, in my opinion, a little bit better. But you know, it's really a question of taste. So Plunker's an in-browser code editor. The idea being, the genesis behind this idea is that I had a lot of, or the genesis behind this site is that I had a lot of ideas for things I wanted to create, but found that there were a number of barriers between between having an idea and implementing that idea. So I was using JS Fiddle at the time and found that a number of frustrations with that website prevented me from implementing these ideas, so I decided to make my own. But clearly, a code editor, any modern code editor for that matter, is pretty useless if you can't drag things around, certainly when you're dealing with multiple files. And in the case of Plunker, one of the main features is that there are multiple files. So here's a little demo of me trying to drag files around with a cheesy animation. So, you know, fail. So that was a small demo from the version of Plunker that's on the website that's on the web right now. And as you can see, it doesn't allow you to do this sort of intuitive behaviors you'd expect from an interface like that. And I knew that I wanted to take this to the next level in the next version of Plunker. So here are a couple quick animations of what I was hoping to accomplish. So as you can see here, I'm dragging script.js I'm dragging it from the lib folder to the project folder. And as you can see, let's see if I can repeat that. So you've seen that, as you can see, it moves. And so that's one behavior I wanted to enable. But then boom, that sort of pane splitting is a second behavior I wanted to enable. But what kind of existing libraries would enable this sort of behavior? So I didn't, I tried looking around to see what was available and found that there was nothing much that could suit my needs. So what I did do is I kind of scanned the internet to see what was out there. I was working Angular, so I decided to target libraries that targeted Angular. That would certainly simplify my work. So I found Angular drag drop, which is a great little wrapper around jQuery UI. That would have been fine in the existing Plunker where I am using jQuery and I am using jQuery UI, but in the next version of Plunker that I'm making, I've chosen not to use those two libraries. And so just to implement drag and drop, I wasn't willing to need to include such heavy libraries just to enable one small feature. I also looked at ngSortable, which in my opinion is a pretty cool library. It's very good for sorting lists, reordering lists, moving items from one list to the other, but not adapted to that sort of pane splitting behavior I showed in that video earlier. I also saw this other one, which is quite close to what I've done, but I'll show you in a second why I chose not to use that one. Actually, I only discovered this one today, but in a retrospective analysis, I would say that it wouldn't have been able to allow me to do what I was looking for. So the first step after I realized that I couldn't use something else that someone had already built that was already good, is to kind of brainstorm how I would go about this. And my first step was to figure out what I needed. So I know that I've got things that I want to drag. I know that there are only certain places to drop stuff, and I know that only certain things can be dropped in certain places. So if you saw earlier in that video, you'll notice that I can drag files into folders, and that makes sense intuitively. We know that in our file system we can drag files, and we can drag them into folders, but we can't drag folders into files. Okay, so there's a sort of logic that needs to be allowed for the system to determine, one, what is being dragged, and two, where you're trying to drop it, and establish whether or not that's a valid combination. There's another type of dragging. For example, if you saw earlier, I was dragging files from the sidebar into the editor pane, and it was splitting those panes. So it would enable that. Now I could not drag a folder into the editor pane because the editor pane is not adapted to editing folders. So those 3 points pretty much make up my needs for this tool. And so I went about thinking about how I might make this in Angular, how I might convert this to code. In Angular, there is a concept called a directive. Now, a directive is sort of like a custom element or custom attribute in an HTML document that allows you to attach behavior to part of your DOM, part of your document. So these are called directives. They're not the easiest thing to learn, and they're not the easiest thing to understand when you're looking at them. But they can let you do some pretty crazy things, and then reuse those things very easily. Now I also realized, as I was doing a sort of survey of what was available, I realized that there was this nice HTML5 spec for dragging and dropping, and that basically allows you to leverage the browser's internal capabilities to clone DOM elements visually, to give you a visual representation of what you're dragging, also to give you visual cues of whether you are able to drop it somewhere, whether the drop is going to be a copy, whether it's going to be a move, different things like that. So there's a spec that was there, that was existing, that I realized could dramatically simplify what I was trying to do. So I wouldn't have to worry about cloning DOM objects and creating like little phantom DOM objects to move around. I realized that I could leverage the power of Angular directives and this existing spec to make my work a lot easier. Now, there was one issue in doing so, which is that while Internet Explorer pioneered this drag and drop API, they've become a little bit of a black sheep now, as the standard or the spec has moved beyond what they do. So IE only allows you to specify items that are being dragged as text or as URLs. Now in Plunker, what I'm actually dragging around are either files, folders, or panes. So you can drag a file into a folder, you can drag a folder into a folder, you can drag a file into a pane, and you can drag panes around in different panes to rearrange them. And so being limited to text and URLs in IE was not going to cut it. So what I realized is that using Angular, I would be able to put my own layer on top of that, still leveraging the existing browser APIs, but to give additional functionality by allowing the system to realize that what was being dragged was not simple text, but instead an in-memory object that the library could map between perhaps a unique ID and an object in memory. So how did I build this? I'm going to show you the what it looks like in use. The directives I created to accomplish what I wanted to do. So I created a drag container. A drag container represents the DOM object that can be dragged around. Okay. A drop container represents an area, a DOM element. So this DOM element represents the area in which a drag container can then be dropped. And finally, I also created the concept of a drop area. Now, a drop area was very specific to my use cases, and I'll explain why in a second. But in coming up with this configuration, I think the drop area concept, and like I said, I'll explain this in a second, is quite a new concept, in that it splits a drop container into multiple virtual areas. So if you saw earlier when I was dragging files into the editor pane, into the workspace, if I dragged a file to the left side of an existing pane, it would offer to split that pane on the left. If I dragged it to the top, it would offer me to split it on the top, split vertically. So I could do that on the right and the bottom as well. But not only that, I could drop it in the center, in which case it would simply replace the pane. So how do you enable these sort of virtual viewports into a droppable area? That's the concept of the drop area that I incorporated. So again, this goes back a little bit to the internals of Angular, but like I said earlier, is in IE you are limited to describing the data that you're dragging as either text or as a URL. In Plunker, these are in fact, the things that are being dropped are in fact much more complicated compound objects with a file name, with contents, with parent relationships, different things like that. So I needed a way to map between what the browser thought I was dragging and what the application thought I was dragging. I created a service called $dragging that whose sole purpose was to fulfill this missing functionality that I wanted. So this is what it looks like. At the top here, you have some HTML that defines a drag container. And that drag container, you can see the attribute drag container equals model. So what that's saying is that in Angular, you have this concept of scopes. Scopes being a collection of data, like in-memory objects, in-memory functions, in-memory values that are attached to. Yogesh, I'll get back to you a little bit later. You want to save that to the very end. So this drag container says, okay, if I look in the current scope in which this element is defined, I will find a model value. Okay, and that's what I want to represent in memory as what is being dragged if I were to start dragging this drag container. And I want that bit of information, that in-memory object, to be considered text / whatever. This is just a hypothetical example. Now, the second directive, or the second div that you see, the one that has drop container, that's basically a container that I've defined that accepts an array of different MIME types. In this case, what I've said is it accepts text / x Plunker files, and that's actually a line from the new Plunker. And what it says is that this container, as long as the MIME type of the thing being dragged is text x Plunker file, it will accept it. Otherwise, it will simply reject it, and nothing will happen in the browser. The two inner divs in the second div, the drop target left and drop target right, are the elements, the directives to which the drop events are delegated in the event that the item is dropped either on the left or on the right side of that containing drop container. And I'll show you what these virtual viewports look like in a second. So I've already described this in a little bit of detail, but here's a couple slides that pretty much go over what I've just said. What's interesting here is just a little background on that HTML5 API I was telling you about. It's a little bit of a counterintuitive API in that for an element that should accept drops in a drag and drop system, you actually have to cancel or prevent the default action for drag enter and drag over events. Otherwise, the browsers will take their default action, which is to simply not react to this sort of event. So you would think that prevent default would be the opposite of what you want to do, but in reality, to take advantage, to leverage this API, you need to prevent the default action so as to opt into this alternative thing, which is to say, I want to accept drop events. So second directive is the drop container. I mentioned kind of the accept test, and that's a comparing of the MIME type against of the MIME type being dragged versus the MIME type that's accepted. And so its role, as I mentioned earlier, you do not have to delegate events down to drop targets. If you do not have drop targets, you can have on drop in a drop container. But in the event that you want these virtual viewports in your drop container, the system will automatically delegate events down to those when the event is happening in the appropriate region. And so these virtual viewports, these sort of virtual viewports, the way they work is that as you are dragging within a drop container, imagine this blue square is a drop container. As you're dragging, if you are closest to the top left corner, and there is a top left corner drop target that has been declared in the DOM, that will be the element that accepts all drag and drop events. And so as you move your mouse around during a drag event, the currently active drop target will be recalculated based on where you are relative to the bounding box of that element. And just to be clear, you do not need any drop targets, but as soon as you add them, those will be the only ones considered to establish which the closest one is. So basically I just calculate the minimum distance between the mouse and the point, and that's how I determine the active target. So I've gone through this in pretty good detail now. I'll just skip by. The interesting thing is that because I'm doing this as an Angular directive, I'm able to add a little bit of extra behavior here and say that as I'm moving around, as different targets become active or inactive, I can add appropriate CSS style classes to them and thereby give visual hints to the users of which regions are active, which regions are inactive, and just give an overall indication that a drag is happening and a drop is acceptable in this area. So how do you link them all up? This is a little bit of the Angular internals. If you're not familiar with Angular directives, this might not make much sense to you. But if you are at an entry level to Angular and you're starting to do directives, this could be helpful. It's a bit of an explosion of code here. The interesting part to link two directives up, or to link the controllers of two directives up, is the fourth line, require, and then there's that little caret drop container, and then comma drop target. And so that require, that line saying require a drop container which is higher up the scope, higher up the DOM hierarchy, require also a drop target. And the drop target is the directive itself. So that means you are in the link function, the final attribute controllers. That means sorry, that means that'll be an array of two items. You've said you require a drop container higher up the scope, higher up the DOM. So your drop container will be control 0, and your drop target will be controls 1. And then what you could do is basically tell your drop container that you want to register this new drop target with it. So that's just kind of a little parenthesis. It's a little bit into the detail of the actual Angular implementation. Excuse me. For any people interested in using this library, please note that the drop targets are just attachment points. They're not actually designed to contain content. They will be positioned absolutely within the containing element, and that's simply to give them the opportunity to present visual cues to the user. So I've gone over this already. So back to this HTML5 API, there's a number of events that are built into the spec, and that different browsers expose them to different extents. Basically what I've done is I've tried to expose these to the users of the directives on drag start, on drag end, so you can use these in your markup, and they will be called appropriately with injected special objects. So you'll be able to look at the event, the originating event, as well as the data attached to the item being dragged. So here's a little example from a demo I'll show you shortly. Basically that's saying when we have a drop container here that accepts a piece of a Dragular board, and you'll see what Dragular is shortly, but it's a sliding tiles game, and it says when you drag something into this space and it is of the right type, so it's a Dragular piece, you're going to swap the piece that is at the current index with the piece that is being dragged via the data object that's exposed by Angular drag and drop, the library. So I'll just show you a few demos of what you can do. And before I do that, I'm just going to say, so I went through a number of libraries of prior art, and you may still be wondering why I didn't use those, because all of this at some level could be hacked on. But I feel that at a certain level, those libraries might have been going about things backwards, in the sense that what they're trying to do is give you a way to reorganize the DOM as a primary concern. So sort things, drag them from one list to another. And then what happens is they will give you the ability to, after that has happened, to react to it, to update your model. What I've done is exactly the opposite, is I've given you the tools to react to the drag and drop events, reorganize your model, and then it's up to the user, it's up to the application to update the view accordingly. And I'll show you a little bit the limitations of my approach versus the others, as well as explaining that I feel like this really helps you avoid situations where your view, your DOM, will get out of sync with the underlying data. It just lets you code in more of a single directional flow, a little bit like all this flux stuff that's coming around these days. So here's a couple demos. First one. Oops. So first demo here is actually from my friend Lucas Rublicki's upcoming book. It's in pre-release right now, and basically the book is about building a full Trello-like application. And I helped him out by integrating this drag and drop library into it, because what he wanted to do was to be able to drag items around, right? In Trello, you can drag cards from one status to another. So let me just show you dragging this. Now you see it's gone sort of transparent. As a user of the HTML5 drag and drop spec, I didn't have to create the logic to clone the DOM and to make it semi-transparent like this. That is a byproduct of using this. And so, as you can see, as I drag this into another list, I can move things around, no problem. I can reorder things within a list and move them from one list to another. Sorry, it's a little, I can see that it's a little slow in the video, but watch as I drag this. You'll see that before I even release it, the underlying card has already moved before I drop it. See? I have not yet dropped it. It's moved around. And then what I'm doing is I'm actually syncing this to the server upon drop. And that's why the screen goes into a spinner. So that's the first demo of something that could be done easily with this library. And the way that was done is that each column, now there's nothing visual to indicate what each column is, but basically it's a div the full height of the window is a drop container, and each little card is a drag container. And so I don't have to worry about different targets or regions of the virtual regions. I'm just using it at the most basic level to say, on drag enter into a new column, you're going to reassign this card from one array to another, from the to-do array to the in-progress array. And so I've affected the underlying model here. The model's changed, and that's what's resulted in the view changing. Okay, and here I'm responding to, if I drag into the lower half of a card, if I drag a card into the lower half of an existing card, I'm going to put it below. I'm going to splice it into the underlying array after. And if I drag it to the upper half, I'm going to splice it into the array in front of it. So I can easily do a reorderable list like that. So that's the first demo. I'm going to show you the sliding puzzle now. Another thing that was very easy to do. Now this is the demo that's in the GitHub repository for this drag and drop library. And basically, I'm just going to put on a really easy difficulty here. Give it a sec to load. One second. Okay. So I've just told it in the query parameter here to only shuffle things twice. So what I can do is I can move pieces around, but I cannot move them where they don't belong. I can only swap them with the white square. Basically, this is a 16-element array where, by convention, I've said that the value 0 is empty and everything else corresponds to a tile of a larger image. And so I can just rearrange these and win the game. It's a little demo of how you might be able to put something together with Angular drag drop. The third demo I'd like to give is this actually showing you this drag and drop in action. So let's say I've just dragged that. So let's say I wanted to replicate the JS fiddle view. I have my index, I have my HTML in the upper left. I want my style in the bottom left. So let me put that there. And just get rid of the preview for now. Let's start again. Put that there. Script there. And with a preview, and I'm just going to put it down below. And so this library, exposing a number of quite simple primitives, allows me to do these diverse behaviors. I can take a pane and drag it to another pane, you see. I can even replace an existing pane. I could try dragging a directory, but as you can see, nothing happens. It's giving me a visual cue that this is not an appropriate place to drop it, so nothing happens. And I could try dragging a pane into this sidebar, and again, you see that the browser, just by leveraging a few simple primitives and a little bit of logic, I am able to using all the same code, do this sort of complex behavior. And if I go back to my presentation, I'll just give you a couple of caveats, and I've got one little bonus thing that's pretty cool. If you're using this API, at each time you enter a new element, you need to determine on a synchronous basis if what is being dragged into that element can be dragged into that element. You cannot fire off a server query. You cannot do any asynchronous code. You have to respond immediately. So that's a bit of a caveat. Is that this sort of logic will have to happen in the main thread. And if you want to attach or build a complex big object and attach it to a drag event, this means a little bit extra processing in the main browser thread than you might normally like. You can't offload that to a web worker and then get the result of the web worker back. and then say, oh yeah, by the way, attach this to the drag event. No, we can't do that. Just a couple caveats that you should know about. So if you want to look at the code, it's MIT licensed. It's on GitHub at Goodman Angular-drag.drop. You can always ping me on Twitter as @filearts or plunkerco. And I'll just give you one little cool little demo here. Just go exit. Give me 1 second here. Let's say I've come up with this cool project here, and I realize that I want to share it with someone, not using Plunker, but I want to maybe put this on Dropbox or something. Something that's very cool about the HTML5 drag and drop API is you can in Chrome. A special behavior has been enabled that's exposed through Gmail. For example, you could drag items out of Gmail onto your desktop, and some smart people went and kind of reverse engineered how they're doing that. And so I realized that this gives us the power to do something pretty cool very easily. Now I can take a file like index.html and drag it straight to my desktop. I could even take an entire project and drag it to my desktop. And with the power of a number of different packages out there, I have actually zipped the entire project in memory in the browser and attached it to a drag event. And now I can drag my entire project as a zip file to my desktop. And sorry, this opened on my other monitor. And as you can see, it's all here. So I thought that was pretty cool, and that's just one more thing. And at this point, I guess I should open it up to questions and comments, and I'll get back to your question, Yogesh. So I'm going to stop the screen sharing.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Geoff. Yeah, why don't we start with Yogesh's question? Everyone else, please feel free to throw any questions into the chat. I also have some that were emailed in if we don't have any other ones in the chat. But yeah, Geoff, feel free to start with Yogesh's there.
Okay, so doesn't that add a lot of overhead to the digest loop and the corresponding watchers? I haven't enabled this. I haven't. In putting this set of directives together, I elected not to use the default scope bindings, and so the scope bindings, I'm only reading from scope on a as needed basis, and I did this for exactly that reason, to avoid having unnecessary watchers and unnecessary levels of activity going on. That being said, I think there's still quite a bit of work to optimize this a little bit more. Some future work I'd like to do is to synchronize all the events to request animation frame, or at least to debounce all the handlers that do fire. So definitely that's a good point, Yogesh, and it is a direction for future work. So Eduardo asked for the GitHub repo.
Well, in the meantime, I'll pull up some other questions that we were emailed in. But everyone here, please feel free to keep asking anything via chat. So Geoff, some of the stuff that was emailed in, I'll say ahead of time, is definitely more catered to just the fact that you're the creator of Plunker, not even specifically, the drag and drop stuff that we went over. One person was curious this is almost more about like the development community. What ways, I mean, maybe you would especially have a good take on this, given that you're self-taught and you spend a lot of your time in a different industry. How do you think about getting involved in the community, especially if you're sort of like a newbie to Plunker or Angular? I think this is coming from someone who's just getting started coding but wants to be, contributing and vocal right away. Oh, let me just mute this person who just came in.
So here I am up on screen. So
Nice.
that's a really good question, and actually, the reason I'm not looking at the camera is I've got two monitors on, so it might look a little weird. I just came back from NGConf. And that was actually my first exposure to the programming community. And the subject of my talk was a little bit along that line, actually. How do you become involved? How do you contribute to this community? How do you improve yourself, and how should others help others do this? I'll post the link of the talk. It's actually online. You can watch it on YouTube. But it really came down to three things that Lucas Rubelke and I wanted to encourage, which was, one, make mistakes. So if you're a brand new programmer and you're looking to get some feedback, but maybe you're telling yourself, oh, I'm not at that level yet where I can really contribute to the community, I would say that's wrong. I would say don't be so hard on yourself. I'd like to think that the community will be there to support you, and there will be people who are maybe a little bit tough. But for example, Lucas, who's a huge figure in the Angular community, huge figure in the front-end programming community at large, and for a long time he was reluctant to post, he was reluctant to blog, he was reluctant to do webcasts, to do different things like that, because he said, you know what, I don't feel like I'm there yet. When will I be there? I'm going to wait till I feel like I'm at that level that I can really contribute to this community. And at some point, he realized that he would never really be sure when that moment came, and so he just went and started blogging. Even if he was still very new to the technology, he started writing blogs, and he was corrected. He was corrected actually by the creator of Angular itself, and corrected in a truthful, sometimes harsh, but always encouraging way. And as a result, he started engaging the community, engaging them in his learning, and it allowed people to follow along, and it reflected their learning as well. And so that comes back to our first point, which was make mistakes. Don't be afraid to go out there and write a blog post or write a library that maybe in your opinion isn't the best thing that could ever exist. Well, I would say go ahead and do it. Make it exist. It's a whole lot better if you've created something and shared it than just left that idea in your head. And our second point was use the work of other people. We called it make compositions. So I mentioned in my talk that the first thing, I mentioned actually just now that the first thing I did was look at what else was out there. I'd like to use as much as possible stuff that other people have built, because it really saves me work. It lets me leverage all this good stuff that other people have committed to the community. And so I think that's one way to give back to module authors, is to actually use their stuff. I kind of explained why I decided not to in this case, but in general, if I can get 80% of what I want out of the library, I'm probably going to use it and figure out a way either to adjust my approach or just patch it or something, or even submit a pull request to get it to do that extra 20%. And the third subject of our talk was make friends. And so I'm really glad you asked this sort of question. How do you get involved with the community? Well, it's this sort of thing, like just reaching out to people, kind of exposing yourself to feedback, and showing people what you can do, and showing people where you are, and other people will help you. So So that's my rather long-winded answer.
Awesome. Oh, that's great. And I mean, once you started sort of, exploring all of that yourself, when did you see Plunker? I don't know if you had any software that you had published before Plunker, but really start to be adopted by a lot of people.
I was a little lucky in that way. This is the first real sizable project that I've ever published. And I got lucky in that I was creating this at the same time that Angular was becoming popular. And I shared this with Igor Minar, who was one of the Angular core team, very early in its development. And if you watch my talk, you'll see some pretty crazy, if not stupid, things that I had done in creating that first version. But yeah, I'd say it's a little bit of luck, timing, and duct tape, holding it all together.
Awesome. And I mean, when you were going through your process of self-education with coding, what were the resources you were going to? What was your process for learning JavaScript or Angular or any of this stuff?
I wouldn't say that I ever had a process. I've always been someone who just consumes everything there is possible about what's new, what people are doing, what people have been able to do in the past, and I like to see and understand how they've done it. And often that leads me to try and experiment with things myself, and that always opens up new avenues of reading, of learning. So yeah.
Gotcha. Well, if anyone else has any other questions, please chime in. I'm looking over the list of questions that were emailed in, and you covered a lot of them. But what would motivate you to make Plunker? What was the pain you were trying to ease? How is it different from JS Fiddle? Those were a lot of the stuff that were sent in. So if no one has anything else, oh, Yogesh just sent another one in. Let's take a look at that. About the drop container directive you had. How was that implemented? How do you check the MIME type of the file? Maybe you could address that.
Okay. I do it very simply. Actually, so in the drag container directive, you declare the MIME type of what's being dragged, and you do that through an attribute. So that MIME type is actually just a string behind the scenes. There's no fancy MIME comparison. I just use MIME types because that jives well with the underlying API. And the MIME type is what allows me to do things like dragging files from the editor to the desktop. But so the drag container declares the type of data that's being dragged, and it can only be one type at this point. It's a simple string. And then the drop container or drop targets declare an array of strings. And in the examples I've shown, they're actually formatted as MIME types, but that's really up to the user. It could be foobar if you wanted it. So how do I check it? It's a simple text equality. I just loop through the array of files that are accepted in the drop container, and if any of them matches the type that's being dragged, then I accept.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I guess if there's no other questions, we can wrap up. But gosh, Geoff, thank you so much for your time and sharing this amazing project with us. Everyone definitely check out Geoff's work on Twitter and keep up with what Plunker's doing. If any of you ever need any assistance with any Angular or JavaScript projects, obviously CodeMentor has a bunch of experts in that area, so keep us in mind. But if there's nothing else, I'll let everyone go and have a great rest of the day or evening wherever you are in the world. Yeah, thank you so much.
I'm just going to share the link to the talk from the other day. I think
oh yeah,
for those of you who are wondering about the getting involved in the community and how I started, this gives a little bit more background. It's pretty funny. Highly recommend. I'm not the funny one in the video, so don't worry. It's actually funny for real. But we've had a lot of positive feedback from people who saw it either in person or over the internet, and we really hope that it gets people going and gets people motivated to kind of show what they're able to do, and also for people who are looking at new content that's been created by new contributors to not judge that, but instead to encourage it and to correct them and to help them learn more. So here's the YouTube. Thanks
Awesome.
guys for watching.
Yeah. All right.